Friedman. Ms. Sullivan, would you like to cross-examine Mr. Palmisano?
We would like to ask some questions of Mr. Palmisano. Ray Lutz is going to...
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Lutz.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to be as brief as possible, knowing that I spent a long time yesterday. These questions are to relate the reasoning used for the actions taken in 2012 by Edison and the $130 million spent in OEM over and above the level that was not authorized, but there's an interim allocation. If we look at SCE 10, the timeline, I'd like to work our way through some of the benchmarks in this timeline. Let's try to reconstruct what happened. On 3-1,
could you give me a page number reference?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is in
SCE 10?
SCE 10. It's at the back. It's page 64, 65, and 66.
Thank you. I have that now.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with this timeline?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. If we look at the entry for 3/1/2012, it says U2 fuel move to core from fuel pool completed. Did I read that accurately?
Yes, you did.
Okay. When did the U2 move to core from fuel pool start?
I don't have the start date, and it's not on the timeline. Typically, that's about a 7-day evolution, but we don't have that on the specific timeline.
Okay, so 7 days, probably?
I'm giving you a typical number from my past experience.
Would you think that it would be after the tube break in Unit 3 that you started to move the fuel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, why did Edison choose to move the fuel into the core after the Unit 3 emergency?
Okay. The Unit 2 was in a planned refueling outage, which started, I believe, around January 9th, first entry on the timeline. So when you see the 3/1 date, that was in accordance with the Unit 2 refueling outage schedule. And the tube leak in Unit 3 occurred January 31st. Unit 3 would have been in the process of being inspected. We continued the normal refueling outage activities on Unit 2 at that point. So that's why we put the core back from the fuel pool into the reactor in Unit 2 on that date.
So even though there was an emergency that shut down the other unit with the new steam generator of the same design from the same vendor, and that had run longer than the one that had just caused an emergency, you just went ahead with the refueling as planned. Was there any, let me ask this, was there any discussion that you know of to save some money and not put the fuel into the core?
Object to the form of the question as compound.
Please rephrase the question.
Let me see if I can split that up. Was there any discussion about not moving the fuel into the core at that time?
There was no discussion that I'm aware of from deviating with the planned outage schedule for Unit 2 at that point.
Okay. Would that have saved any money?
I would have to conjecture probably not. All the contractors are mobilized and are on site at that point. In fact, it probably would have incurred extra cost to demobilize.
So not putting it in would cost the same as putting it in, the way you schedule your workers? Is that the way you're saying?
What I'm referring to is for a refueling outage, you mobilize not only your own workforce, but you have significant contract workforce on site to execute your work, in this case in about a 60-day period. And at the time we were reloading the core on Unit 2 in accordance with the schedule, we did not have enough information out of Unit 3 to make any different decision. So the prudent course was to continue the plan, and then ultimately we decided not to restart Unit 2 as we learned more about Unit 3.
Is there any if you move the fuel into the core, does that mean it's unusable or unsaleable, or does it reduce the value of the fuel in any way? Like if you put it in, then you could not take it back out and maybe resell it or recondition it somehow so it could get some money out of it if you never use it?
What part of the fuel are you referring to?
Well, the part that you moved into the core at that time.
Okay, so that is both partially used fuel and new fuel assembly. So which part would you be referring to?
I'm not sure. Is there a difference between those two in your answer?
Well, the fuel that has been in a typical refueling, you take a third to a half of the fuel out every cycle and replace it with fresh fuel. So half to a third to two-thirds of the fuel going back in has been partially used. So that is radioactive. It cannot be sold, cannot be moved off-site. So that's not a candidate for what you're asking. If you're asking, the new fuel assemblies that are uniquely designed and built for San Onofre really are not viable for any other plant. So there's really no difference between once it's in the fuel pool ready to reload the core, there's not an option really to pull it out and ship it somewhere else.
Okay. Let's go down to April 20th in this timeline. And it says that at that point you had the Unit 2 tube-to-tube wear inspection letter to NRC. I imagine that means that you sent it to NRC. And then after that, on the 23rd, it says the Unit 2 first tube wear root cause analysis was issued by SCE. Do you see that in the timeline?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Apparently, this report disclosed some tube-to-tube wear in the Unit 2 steam generators and other wear similar but not as extensive as the Unit 3 steam generator. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I would need to see the letter. I just have a line entry here on the chronology. I would need to see what the letter said.
Okay, but wasn't it the case at that time, or wasn't it the case in 2012, you did reach the realization that that Unit 2 did have similar wear, although not as extensive as occurred in the Unit 3?
Yes, we identified two tubes in Unit 2 that had signs of tube-to-tube wear, much less extensive, but certainly told us the potential existed for Unit 2.
Okay. And the root cause analysis was issued for Unit 2 on April 23rd, 2012.
Correct.
According to this. When was the root cause analysis for, well, I guess I have it down here. At the bottom, the 5/7/2012, it says U3 first tube wear root cause analysis issued. So it was issued after. And why was the Unit 2 root cause analysis done before the Unit 3? Since the Unit 3 was the one with the emergency and we're really worried about what actually happened, why did you put one before the other?
The Unit 2 data was, the Unit 2 inspection occurred earlier as part of the planned inspection for the refueling outage. For some perspective, Unit 2 ran a full cycle with new steam generators were required to do 100% tube inspection. And that inspection identified the high amounts of normal wear. It identified the retainer bar wear, so we fairly quickly then started a root cause on that identified wear in Unit 2. Then when we identified the tube-to-tube wear in Unit 3, we initiated that root cause. So it was just a matter of when the data was discovered. That's why the sequence was the way it was.
So by April 23rd, then isn't it the case that Edison knew that Unit 2 had tube-to-tube wear and substantial other tube wear due to the retaining bars and support structures inside the steam generator? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. And then in June, the timeline shows the planning began. So this is on the next page. The planning begins to place in June. It doesn't give a date in June, just 6/2012. It says U3 planning begins to place the unit in preservation mode. You see that entry?
I do see that.
Okay. With later, we see down here October 1st, 2012, U3 reactor defueling begins. Do you see that entry?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thanks. So after April 23rd, it was clear that Unit 2 had substantial problems and Unit 3 was targeted for preservation mode. Did SCE perform any deliberate cost-effectiveness analysis to assess all reasonable options, including total decommissioning of songs?
My role was to lead the technical work related to both units, particularly the steam generators. I was not involved in any cost-effective or cost analysis of options at that point.
Are you aware of any cost-effectiveness analysis in Edison in that time frame regarding the decisions that you were making for with regard to these units?
I'm not aware of any analyses in that time frame.
Was there any analyses done in the entirety of 2012 regarding the decisions that were made? A deliberate analysis.
The corporation is certainly looking at the long-term future, and I think under general rate case scenarios, looking at different options and the cost-effectiveness of different options for the songs units. I'm not directly involved. I'm aware that they're doing that because I provide information to that process.
So when the decision was made to put the planning begins to place a unit in preservation mode, how did that happen? Who did that? And I mean, how do you come about that decision? That's a pretty big decision, isn't it?
Well, it is, and let me give you some context. In that March to April to May to June time frame, we were able to fully characterize the Unit 2 steam generator condition. Okay. And we characterized fully the Unit 3 steam generator condition. And the way I would tell you, the principal focus is on the unique tube-to-tube wear as the principal reason the plants needed to remain shut down under the confirmatory action letter. The other amounts of wear with respect to Unit 2 especially are manageable. The plant can be operated. We have industry experience on how to monitor that and trend that. But the tube-to-tube wear needed to be dealt with prior to restart, and that was what we committed to in the confirmatory action letter. As we looked at the depth of the analysis we needed, we decided to focus on Unit 2, get back to my earlier comment about segregating my team, one team to focus on restart in the short term, the other long-term options for Unit 3. And then as we looked at the sequence, it was important to protect the asset, and that's what a preservation mode, and the earlier witness talked about preservation long-term layup. There's a lot of experience in the industry in nuclear and fossil plants. If you don't pay attention when you're offline for an extended period of time and lay your systems up properly, you can run into degradation and corrosion because the systems are idle and exposed to air. So that's what the preservation plan is. So we decided that Unit 3 would not restart in the near term. It was more appropriate to put it in a layup or preservation mode and ultimately defuel it as we focused on restart for Unit 2.
Okay. In your answer, you said you decided, or we decided to do that. Was that done at a lower level, or did that actually climb up to upper levels of management and the decision-making process?
Up through the chief nuclear officer, and that level.
The higher-level management ever try to make any assessments as to the decisions that were being made by lower-level people?
Higher-level management was regularly briefed, because I was part of those briefings. Whether they made any assessments, I couldn't comment on. I was not involved in any assessments they may have done.
In the recent questioning, we were looking at the SCE 21. I just want to take a divergence here for a second. This letter that happened late in the year regarding the repairs of songs units 2 and 3 steam generators. Was this the first communication from SCE to MHI about the need for a repair plan?
Not at all.
When did you start talking to MHI and demanding a fix?
We started talking to MHI Very quickly after the tube leak occurred and the data was identified in Unit 3 in terms of both short-term restart support, first of all, characterization of what the cause of the issue was, because MHI had to determine that as well as us. And then we started regular discussions at various levels with MHI about both short-term actions as well as long-term actions.
I noticed that in some of these letters, I don't know if it's this one, but you gave them a 15-day deadline. That sounds pretty good for trying to get a response. Did you give them a 15-day deadline early on and get any response from them?
We did not give them a 15-day deadline early on. We and they, and I think the industry, recognized the unique nature of this fluid elastic instability and the damage it caused. And that takes adequate time for capable technical people to do eddy current examinations, look at the results, model the results, understand them. So early on, there needed to be adequate time to do that work.
On 423, we discussed the fact that you had received the Unit 2 root cause analysis, or you had completed that. Did you give MHI a 15-day deadline at that point? Because at that point you knew what the cause was, and they should get going on it, don't you think?
The 423 report identified the causes of the wear. I'm sorry. This 423 report identified the cause of the wear we found in Unit 2. We completed the evaluation of both units for tube-to-tube wear in the Unit 3 root cause report, so we did it in one place, and that was 5/27, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, 5/7/2012.
Okay, you're right, 5/7. So let's move up to that point.
And so
after the 5/7 and you had both of them done, did you contact MHI and give them a 15-day deadline?
We were in discussions with MHI about the need for them to then propose what short-term and long-term actions would be appropriate based on the cause. But again, this is a complex activity, and on 5/7 or 5/7/2012, we understand the cause to be fluid elastic instability. The fix for that is not a 15-day effort to determine the engineering behind that. So we did not give them a 15-day deadline at that point.
So what kind of deadline did you give them? Because it looks like the next letter was on the end of November. Was it a 6-month deadline?
I don't recall if we gave them a deadline in May, and as I think you saw in the other exhibit, there were letters earlier than November 28th.
Don't you consider time to be of the essence in this matter?
Time is important, certainly.
Okay. On the timeline, we noticed that there are many times when the Unit 2 restart was slipped. There's probably half a dozen places here. I see it 314. Well, actually 313 is maybe the first reference one. It says schedule slip from 320 to 415. There was probably earlier a slip from the original return to service on 3.4 to 320. That wasn't in there. But there's a number of other places where it was slipped maybe a month at a time. Do you remember those changes in schedule?
Yes, I do.
Is it true that changing a schedule like this costs money?
On what basis?
Whenever you reschedule something, does it cost money to replan and try to find out what would happen? Is there any cost to changing a schedule?
It would depend on the activity that you're talking about. These schedules were based on our ability to complete our technical work as SCE, supported by our various vendors, including MHI, and submit a response to the confirmatory action letter. So what drove these schedule changes for the restart date was the amount of time we needed to do the appropriate technical work to assure Unit 2 would be safe at 70% power, and we had the analytical work done to support that, which ultimately resulted in the confirmatory action letter submittal on October 3rd of 2012. So we sent target dates along the way, and as we got deeper into the work and realized both the complexity and depth we needed, we changed the schedule several times to reflect that.
Okay, one more question. Later in the year, I see October 20th, 2012, it says Unit 2 achieves Mode 4. What does that mean?
Okay, along the line of the earlier question of the previous witness, that's one of the modes identified in our license and technical specifications. So Mode 4 represents the temperature and pressure that the primary system is at.
And there's a term that's used by the NRC for that mode?
I don't have it at my fingertips. The previous witness, I think, read that into the
I think
record.
that's called cold shutdown, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
I think Mode 5 is cold shutdown off the top of my head. But
Okay.
again, I'd have to see the previous list that the previous witness had.
Okay, you're right, it's Mode 5. This is when you started to do some testing. You raise it up to Mode 3 on 1023 using the additional, there were some additional boilers that were purchased for that testing?
We rented an auxiliary boiler to provide steam for the secondary side, so we could take the plant from Mode 5, which is basically temperature-wise below 200 degrees, up to Mode 3, full temperature and pressure, which was allowed under the confirmatory action letter to allow us to do some post-outage testing and take advantage of that opportunity. And then we returned the plant, as you can see on 1027, to Mode 5. So we heated the plant up, did some testing, and then cooled the plant back down.
And what was the results of that test?
Well, there are multiple tests. Whenever you have a refueling outage, you do thousands of jobs, some of which need the plant at temperature and pressure to do your final post-maintenance test. Generally, they were all satisfactory, or we identify minor things which would be typical out of any refueling outage.
But this wasn't normally planned, because this was not in the refueling outage.
No, it was not. This was because of the continued nature of the outage that we took this opportunity.
Did you test this to see if it would run at 70% rate? Because that's what I thought it was for.
No. The confirmatory action letter prevents us from entering Mode 2.
I realize that, but
Okay,
you need to simulate.
No, the plant cannot get to 70% power in Mode 3 at full temperature and pressure. Your power production systems don't have steam flow to run it at that power level. So that was not the purpose of that.
Okay, so then on 1027 you went back into Mode 5, which I think that was the cold shutdown.
Correct.
All right. Now, was Unit 2, was there any other modes that Unit 2, did Unit 2 ever go into Mode 3 or more during the entirety of 2012?
Well, this period we just talked about, I think you just said it.
Yeah.
Okay. Left Mode 5, proceeds through Mode 4 to Mode 3, full temperature and pressure, and then cooled back down to Mode 4 and back down to Mode 5.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of my question.
Thank you. Now, it is 4 p.m. So let's go off the record for a moment and discuss what we